Sister Michelle, how are you? Welcome.
Thank you, Brother Eric. I'm really joyful to be here for so many reasons. And thank you all for joining us this evening. And spring is here, is it not? Just, I always have my window open. Look at it. Look at it. It's 7 o'clock and it's still light out. And I see all the buds trying to burst out in that. Thank you so much, brother, for that wonderful visual, if you will. No more ice and snow. We're looking at grass and the beautiful colors of spring and the insects. I think I could look at that all day. It was just beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. And I loved in that guided meditation, the consistency of spirituality, much like the discipline of nature, and there is a discipline to nature, you need a consistency in your spirituality. And if I'm just going to pivot a little bit and talk about that, this Sunday, and there's a little too much information, I wasn't well, I was in Florida, and I had to make it on a plane. And I have to say, if not for my spiritual practice of meditation, I wouldn't be with you tonight. So I thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. I hear some. Hi. So I'm just very grateful that I have that spiritual practice, because that quiet and peace I found in my meditation was so helpful in getting me home in a time that was a little challenging. So I am so grateful to be here. I feel a lot better, and I feel better already just being with you. Tonight we have a wonderful topic. It's April. So, no, it's March, I'm sorry. And we're still following the being colored by spirituality. And tonight we're going to talk about the life and the brightness of joy. And you just have to be outside now and take it all in, and you'll feel it. And tonight we have a speaker that you know well, I'm sure, if you've been here before. And if not, you're in for a treat. It's Antonio Figueroa. I call him Brother Tony. Brother Tony, what's wonderful about him is he is of this world. He has a very important job as an architect and a planner in New York City, but he's able to balance that spirituality and take its practical in a practical application, which I know I take advantage of whenever I listen to him and speak to him. He is extremely intellectual and very deep, and that's another thing that we're going to get tonight. He's worked as a government official, as have I, so don't hold this against us, where he's also been a corporate manager in addition to managing his own practice of LHP architects. And his work is from all over the world, in Europe and Asia and all over. And he's been a student of Raja Yoga for well over 20 years. And his involvement with the Brahma Kumaris include facilitating retreats for his professional community and participating in programs to further understand spirituality, particularly in professional life. And I know tonight will be a very deep discussion, and hopefully once we get started, you will be able to ask questions as well and become part of that conversation. So welcome, Tony. Nice to see you, Brother Tony.
Hi. Thank you for that great introduction. I don't know about succeeding in balancing spirituality in my regular life, but I definitely try. So we can talk about that. The more I got into it, and I spoke a little bit with Michelle before, the more I realized it had a great deal of relevance to my specific profession, which is architecture, because the underlying text was just as visible light comprises the spectrum of colors, so the spiritual lights.
Tony, can I just interrupt for a minute? Some reason.
So
okay.
It's a really wonderful segue in this whole subject. Sure. Are you able to hear me? Hello?
Having some difficulty, Tony. It sounds like your connection is slow.
Yes, I agree.
If I can get it.
Yeah, maybe you can call in.
connection.
We know you were saying very important and wise things, but we couldn't understand it completely.
Get a better.
And now your picture is frozen and we don't hear anything from Tony.
Right. Well, I'm going to jump in a little bit and just talk about how I never realized until more so on Sunday how important this practice is and how it was purely a miracle that I had this practice, because for literally 7 hours, I meditated, and that's what got me from Florida to New York. So I have to tell you, I am indebted to the Brahma Kumaris and everything I learn every day, because I got to use it. So if this is a TV commercial for meditation, then let it be so. Let me be the meditation spokesman, at least tonight, to tell you how important it was in my life. If every day, I never realized it. So I am so grateful to all that's done and having that practice. And it tied in, it spoke to me when you spoke about discipline. In spirituality, you really do need a discipline. And I found that, and it really was a great help. And is Tony back? Brother Eric, is Tony around? I see him. Tony, I don't hear you. Maybe he's coming back in.
Signed off for a little while.
Okay, yeah, I think he signed off for a little bit. So maybe if someone wants to put in the chat, if they have, I'd like to know if people have a regular practice, a meditation. I do. I meditate every day, a couple of times a day, but I never had such a long meditation. I was wondering if anyone has regular meditation practice. You don't have to be part of this discussion, but if you're interested, right, Brother Eric, that there are classes in meditation that the Brahma Kumaris have in addition to Thursday evening conversations. So I heartily recommend it. It's changed my life. So,
Well, you
and even
should say there is a new class starting on Monday.
thank
at
you.
Harmony House in Great
Okay.
Neck, in
Great.
person only at 6:30. So if
Wonderful.
you have Sister Michelle as your role model, you are quite welcome to learn what she has learned and practice what she has practiced.
Right.
I hope that would work out.
I hope so. Thank you, Brother Eric. And one more thing that was interesting, because I was in Florida, I was visiting my mother. And my mother, once again, who's been to Harmony House, had said to me, whatever you're doing, keep it going. She said, you've changed so much. And that's my own mother. So it is strictly the practice, that spiritual practice that she picked up on. So I can't say enough, and I'm grateful to be here. And I see Tony again. So Tony's still muted, but Tony once gets Tony's.
I'm trying to.
Oh, I hear you.
I'm trying to get on the
No?
other. On the other one was bad. So,
Okay.
but you have to unmute me on my cell phone.
Okay.
Um,
And I'm signing off.
Can you do that?
you know, yeah, I'm looking for your cell phone.
I turned on my visual so you can see me.
Okay, oh, you're just Tony.
I want to make sure I have both of these things. Anyway, let me continue as I can until Eric finds my. Oh, okay. Have you?
You have to mute one of them.
I know. Okay. All
All
right.
right. We have Tony in stereo. Very good.
Very good. Is this better?
Yes. And Michelle is not. It was better. Go with the phone.
Can you hear
Tony,
me on the
Tony?
phone?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay. So what I was thinking about is how relevant this is to my specific profession, because in what I do, architecture, and it's really almost entirely associated with light. So, and the subtext of this session was just as visible light comprises a spectrum of colors, so the spiritual lights comprise a spectrum of spiritual quality. So I thought that was a really great segue that I was given to this event, because in my profession, you cannot have what we do without light. Light is the defines forms, defines a space, defines the entire experience we have in the material world. And I was thinking that was extraordinary, critical elements in most of the art that we have in Western culture and most cultures. And there's entire movements of art, at least in the West, associated with light. The way light is perceived, the way it's represented, the way it's understood. So it was a really kind of great segue, because just as light is the definer of the universe that we live in materially, and the quality of that light begins to define how we experience it, what kind of engagement we have, what kind of pleasure and what kind of reward we get from that experience. That to me is an extraordinary kind of parallel, and I am always, like Michelle was saying in my introduction, I'm always looking for these parallels, because I think that there really is a very direct correlation, maybe integration between material and spiritual existence. So I'm thinking about that, and I'm saying, okay, as an architect, everything I do is basically associated with light. There's just nothing that I do that doesn't have anything to do with light. That doesn't have that's not related to light. And I think that parallel is instructive, because when we think of people, we think of that person has got a glowing personality. So we define these people in terms of light. But what does that really mean? Someone who's glowing, or that person who was glowing when we were talking to them. And basically, this is where I think light and spirituality begin to intersect. Because in the context that we're talking about, and it's a common kind of exchange that you have when you're saying, oh, that person was glowing, or that was a very glowing presentation. So all of these things are associated with light, yet they're not. Obviously, someone doesn't come out with an aura. Very few people, and certainly nobody that I've met, comes out with an aura. So when we say it's glowing, it's a perception. It's a perception that we have that is very important, that we understand what that means, because we all experience it. You all run into someone whose personality is such that you feel like, wow, it's really incredible person to be around. They really make you feel in some sort of positive engagement. And that, I think, is the beginning of what I think the whole concept of light and spirituality begins to, how it affects us, how we begin to experience it. That's really kind of the fundamental notion of light in a spiritual sense. So when someone is got a glowing personality, or you feel that they glow, they don't literally glow, but your experience of them glowing, of them being this luminous creature, is almost palpable, it's almost tangible. You say, yet there is no real light emanating from these people outside of the reflected light of whatever sun or illumination they have. But our perception of these people is very different. We see them differently as other people because we see them colored by a specific type of light that's not necessarily visible to the human eye. But it's still very, very experiential for us. We still sense it. It's so compelling that we actually define it as a physical attribute. So the first kind of transition for me is that just like we have light and it makes things in the material world seem very bright and very compelling, in our material, in our spiritual existence, in a spiritual consciousness, we also experience this same kind of light. And that's the light that we can ascribe to an emotion that we call joy. So when someone or some situation gives you an experience that you're really kind of sensing this very directly, and something that is positive, obviously, you feel very happy, very, very joyful about that particular exchange. That's because there is a quality to the way you are engaged with that person or the situation that you're in. So the first issue in terms of the light of spirituality and how it affects us is how we perceive other people in a particular context. And we perceive them, or we experience them, not perceive them, experience them in a way that brings us a certain kind of, how you say, uplifting quality. Like you're with this person, and when you finish, you feel, okay, this has been a really good experience. You feel light. You feel unburdened. So the first quality of light of spirituality is when you see this in other people, when you perceive it, when you're able to sense something more than the physical attributes of a person or a situation. Then the second part of this process is when you are yourself communicating, engaged with someone. And in that engagement, you bring to that a certain level of transcendence. Whatever the subject you're talking about, whatever the quality of the exchange, it becomes an experience. It's not just an exchange of information. Because we do a lot of exchange of information. I mean, my business, we have meetings all the time. I think that's all I do is go to meetings. I'm not sure I do any work except for going in meetings. I'm hoping that somebody in my office is actually doing work while I'm going to all these meetings. So what exactly happens when you are able to communicate to people? What is this quality that happens when you are engaged with someone, you're talking, you're having any kind of interchange, and it becomes an experience? It stops being information, and it becomes an experience on an emotional level, and it becomes an experience on a perceptual level. So again, in these contexts, you're talking about someone experiencing you, experiencing what you have to say in a way that is not just words, it's not just context. And that is really one of the most important qualities of our exchange. To be colored by spirituality is to be able, to understand at some level how you and your another person, or whatever context you're in, begins to be more than just the sum of the words or the information that you're exchanging. I mentioned art before, and I think it's really important because there's a bunch of movements in art, modern art, that were associated with light. And one of them was actually called, ironically, or maybe not so ironically, the Impressionist movement, because of the way they began to interpret light, interpret how we perceive light. Which means it was not just something that was a representation of something pictorial. It was an understanding of a perception of a particular quality. So in our engagement with people, what is it that we understand or perceive beyond what is being said? And I think that's really where we begin to experience someone beyond words. When we see something extraordinarily beautiful, something that's so incredibly arresting that it takes your breath away, literally stops you from breathing. That is something that we call beauty. But it is not something that is so easily defined in terms of physically, what does it mean? But we experience it. And it's something that transcends whatever words we're engaged with. And to me, that's the beginning of spiritual kind of connection. I like to believe that when you are looking at something beautiful, when you're completely overwhelmed by you going to some sort of beautiful scenery, I don't know, the Grand Canyon or some beautiful mountains, some place where you have a scenery that's just kind of overwhelming, that you're actually looking at this thing not with your own eyes, but with your spiritual eyes. To use a poetic allusion, you're looking at it through the eyes of God. And then you have the experience of listening to some extraordinary, beautiful music, something that just completely takes you away, or you're hearing the words of some beautiful poetry by, or even not just poetry, it could be someone who's speaking about the way we function in this world, and speaking heroic terms about how we need to really understand each other and really understand ourselves. And these words reach us at an emotional and incredibly deep level, like music, like any sound that we hear that can really engage us. So I like to say that that's also another part of spirituality, because we are now experiencing sound, a very fundamental part of our existence, in a spiritual way. And I like to say that is listening with the ears of God. And then the last one of this analogy I want to mention is that when we are engaged with someone directly and we have this incredible connection, and this is the moment in which we begin to feel like this is something completely different, completely transcendent to anything I've experienced before. And that's when you're with someone, and in the context of that relationship, you feel, I am going to do anything I can to make this person's life better, to help them, because I feel such an incredible deep connection and attachment. And this is what we begin to call love. And I like to say that that's feeling the touch of God. So one is the eyes, one is the voice, and lastly, it's the touch of God, when we actually are able to connect with another human being in a way that makes us a total altruistic person who just feels that we are engaged in something, and that what we're doing is this exchange is something that is worth sacrificing yourself over. These are all kind of very elaborate poetic allusions, but these, I think, are the aspects of our material world that really reflect what spirituality and how spirituality is present in our experience, in our understanding of the world. And the examples I mentioned, I think, are important because it is these experiences that bring us happiness and joy. These are the colors of spirituality. One is the perception of spirituality, of understanding there is something beyond our existence. But here we're talking about what does that really mean? How does that affect us in an everyday way, in the environment that we actually experience on a daily basis? So that to me was the beginning of the process of being colored by spirituality. If you look at the parts of your life that are separate, that bring you apart from the material world that you're in, and bring you someplace new, someplace that you feel this is a place I want to be and I would like to stay at or come back to. A place when you're not concerned about tensions, about conflicts, about all the things that constantly make up your existence. That's where spirituality can take you. That is really the premise of how we are constructed, I believe. And it's not just people that are actively engaged in seeking spirituality. I believe that all of these things exist for everybody. Beauty, love, words that transcend the world that we live in. We all know about these things. And it's only when we recognize them as being spiritual expressions that we begin to understand why they are different than the rest of the aspects of our existence. So we have engaged in our lives in many, many activities, obviously. Most of us are extremely busy. Those of us that come here have some understanding that there is something else besides all the things that we have to do to live from day to day. But I think even people that are not necessarily searching or looking for a spiritual quality in their life, they experience it also. It's just that they're not looking at it in that way. And I think we are. Michelle, let me take a breather and see if anybody has some issues or questions they want to ask.
Well, I think you deserve a breather, Tony, because I have to say, as you were speaking this whole time, I thought, well, I have this enormous respect for you because you're talking about something that is often, that word ineffable, hard to describe, at least in the usual mundane conversations that we have, that it was almost soaring rhetoric that you were using, and I heard you trying slowly to piece it together because it is so, I don't want to use the word obscure because that word, but so intangible and so, great philosophers have worked on this. I was never a philosophy major because I never could get it. I think my means to that has been through a spiritual learning path. But some of the things that you spoke about, just to recap, and I want to open this up to the audience because it was most profound what you said, especially in light of your work in architecture and dealing with light. And I know this because my children, my two sons, are artists. One is a design major, one was an art student. So they always spoke about light and as a means to achieve representation, if you will. And I think that's another thing. A lot of art is representational, and it's that goal to get to the real thing. And when you talked about impressionism, that also touched me because oftentimes the most beautiful art was just representational, how the light plays on the paint and to look real, if you will. But what is real? And really what you spoke about is the reality is the spirituality to me, that the painting is, that this is not a pipe, as Magritte said, that I love that, if you're familiar with the artist Magritte, he would have the piping and he says it in French, this is not a pipe. Of course it's not a pipe, it's a representation of a pipe and it's painted with light. But what you're speaking about is something much more profound. But again, and I wanted to ask you a question, you spoke about, and I don't want to get into physics because oftentimes these discussions, I get stuck in the physics, and I hated physics in school. But when you spoke about that luminescence of people, that certain people are luminescent, I love that term because it's true. I've had that where you can be dark, let's say, for whatever reason, and you meet someone, and for that 1 minute you connect through a smile, through your eye contact, their luminescence changes that relationship. And you use that term relationship. But isn't it an energy? Light is a vibration and energy. And I don't know the physics of light, but when you're with someone who's luminescent, as you say, don't they, we talk about higher energy versus lower energy. Isn't it similar thing that we can't fathom in layman's terms, but it's a vibration, both light, physical, as well as that vibration that person, that luminescence is, it must be at a very high vibration for you to feel that. So maybe you were better, you were a scientist, you were an architect. Can you speak a little about that vibration, light versus that luminescence inside? Maybe it's the same thing.
Well, you actually, you have just described one of the great dichotomies of physics, that light is both a wave and it's both a projection. So what happens with light is
that's how I passed physics.
what happened with light is if you measure it a particular way, it's like a wave, it's like a radio wave, right? Mm-hmm. And if you measure it in a physical way, it's basically the projection of photons. Mm-hmm. I mean, but so light actually has both a vibration and both a physical, illumination. So it is, in fact, they're both that. And to me, that makes sense, because I think Einstein was very correct in that he said, when they asked him about science, he says, "Oh, my job is just to figure out the mind of God." So I'm I very much think that his particular position was, because those two qualities used to describe, is it a vibration or is it a direct illumination? And it is both. Light is both. Light is both vibration and it is direct kind of flooding of photons. So it is both these things. But you also something else just before that was very interesting about philosophy versus and how that fits into this whole context. And I had a thought about this recently that I'm happy to have an opportunity to share with you, is that I feel that philosophy and all of these engagements that people have in trying to define the universe as physics, philosophy, many parts of science, they're basically looking at the same phenomena from a different perspective. So when we look at when we look at a phenomena of transcendence, okay, let's look at objectively. We look at phenomena of transcendence. This is transcendent moment, transcendent situation, transcendent exchange. We look at it from the context of spirituality. We have engaged in someone's spirit. It's his soul or her soul. When the philosophers and the people that deal in the abstract qualities of man's evolution, they also have the same position about transcendence. Matter of fact, a book that I'm reading recently is by a historian. He says that the human intelligence, what we consider the human intelligence, human consciousness, happened a certain amount of time ago, and that it was the people that began to have transcendent values, to be able to have altruism and communal, which is a basis of communal structure, organizational structure, is when civilization began, which I thought was a very interesting perspective. It's very interesting. It didn't begin when people were able to create agriculture and have a surplus, but when people were able to believe in something beyond themselves. So you have and this person is not necessarily religious, and philosophy is the same thing. They're looking at things from the other side, but they're looking at the same phenomena. It's the same human consciousness phenomena, the whole transcendent quality of our existence. So even though science and religion and spirituality are looking at these things from different perspectives, there is at this point, I feel, a very clear agreement that we're looking at the same phenomena. We're just not looking at it from the same perspective. So from our perspective, our things are illuminated by the light of spirituality, whereas the historian and the philosophers feel they're illuminated by the light of knowledge, the light of intelligence, the light of enlightenment. But we're all looking at the same thing. And what's great to me about science and these days is that everybody is agreeing. We're looking at the same thing. We don't agree about what it is, but we know that it's something special. Human consciousness is not the product of evolution. It's not the product of some sort of accumulation of neurons and electrons and synapses. It is a very unique phenomenon. Even science acknowledges that now. Question is, how do you look at it? And I think that's really what the wonderful thing about science right now is that it's gotten to the point, it's evolved to the point where they're looking at these things from a perspective that permits us to have a similar kind of, we're looking at the same thing, except we're over here and they're there. But we're looking at the same thing, and it permits us to have the same kind of dialogue about what does it mean? What does it do for us in terms of understanding this? And we had an experience a while back with the founder of cloning technology, who was part of one of the Brahma Kumari's activities, and he basically went to the other side. He was from the side of science, and he went to the side of spirituality. But he was always looking at the same issue. So it's very interesting. But when you said philosophy, that brought back to mind that we need to think about the fact that we're all talking about the same thing.
Right. Right. I think I read a similar book, and I loved what you said about civilization, whatever that, and being civilized, caring about others. I think that's what I think civilization is. That's what, as a former politician, we used to say, well, I don't mind taxes, as FDR said, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I think he said, I don't mind paying taxes. It brings me civilization. And what civilization means is the caring for others. And what I think civilization happened when people started to look at that there's not a randomness to life anymore, that, many cultures thought that everything was random, that there were these demons and gods that, rained down upon evil randomly. And I think you're right, that civilization, when the people started thinking that there was a power, a great loving power beyond themselves, that's when the need for civilization came. And I think spirituality is that almost endpoint to that it's taken that long. And if you're a Brahma Kumar, you know what I mean, that it has been a cycle, but to come back to that point and that others are starting to accept it. So I don't believe that the world, and I think Einstein said that, and we're getting too scientific, but it's not random what's going on. Wouldn't you agree that things are not as random as they seem, and the light and the luminescence that people give off is not a random thing, that you almost make choices towards that brightness? And if you can speak to that a little bit, is joy a choice? I'm going to put it out there. Tony, is that a choice for a person? And then people could jump in too. Is joy a choice?
I think joy is definitely something to do. You definitely have a role in joy. Without your engagement, you cannot experience joy. In other words, joy doesn't come to you like from nowhere. You're not sitting down, having a meal or relaxing, and joy comes to you. Joy is something that you have to be affirmatively engaged in some activity. And then the result of that activity and the fruits of that activity and the way that activity affects you personally is what defines joy for you. So joy is very definitely something that we have to be actively engaged in. I mean, to go after joy as a goal is very difficult to say, because you have to define what it is. I mean, going after joy, for some people, it's just going after pleasure, and that can mean something that's very, very negative in some cases. Whereas joy, if you have to define it, something in which you have an experience of engagement, of pleasure, of a response from the universe without there being a negative impact on anybody else. So that's when your joy is something that's really, for me, that's how you define joy. Doing something, engage in something that really makes you and in things around you feel better.
Mm-hmm.
The color, you feel better. It's like you're seeing a nice calming color. One of my favorite colors is taupe. So something that's taupe, it feels calming. It feels, it's whatever happened was good, not just for you, but for everything around you. So I definitely think that you have a great deal to do with joy. There is a expression in our studies, which was recently came out to me, which was extremely, extremely significant. It says, the pen by which you trace your fortune is called action or effort. So joy has to be written by that pen, has to be traced by that pen.
That. I love that. Okay, so we have some comments about that joy they believe it's an innate quality of the soul, that it's there, but it has to be absent of what she calls body consciousness. And some may know what body consciousness is, but I just in simple terms, body consciousness, that there's no, I don't know how you would say it if you don't know what body consciousness is, but I think that expectations for something and material reward, if you will. I
but
think
body consciousness has to do with anything you do. If you're extremely concerned with how you are perceived in that context, if your entire focus is how you're perceived, then you're not going to have trouble understanding anything else happening around you, because the focus is only. Yeah, and you definitely cannot have joy, because if everything you do is focused on how you are perceived in whatever context you're in, if you're always concerned about that and how you are perceived, not how you impact other people, not how you affect them, but how you are perceived. We have to make the distinction. It's very important to be concerned about how you impact other people, whether you're hurting them, whether you're helping them. That's all very important. So we're not talking about that. We're talking about your focus and obsession with how you are perceived. If that's a major portion of how you try to define happiness for yourself, you're not going to experience joy, because perceptions are things that are very fleeting.
Right. I love that. That ties into, now I remember what I wanted to ask you, because that ties in, how you are perceived and how you perceive others too, in a material sense, by expecting, how you judge people, you're worried about how people judge you. You talked about when you meet someone, you spoke about the attributes of the person, that luminescence. That's not based on physical attributes, right? Like when you see someone, when you're talking about someone that, oh, that was such pleasure to be in a relationship talking. And what I mean by relationship, even for a short time connecting with someone, it's not the physical attributes of that person that is luminescent that you recall. It is the lightness and it's the opposite of the physical attributes. How do we get to that, to people to see beyond their physical attributes and their so-called categories of who they are, gender, religion, to look beyond that, and that relationship with that person, that experience with that person goes well beyond those physical attributes. And that's when you get that connection. And that's what, to me, brings that luminescence, looking beyond that.
Yeah,
right?
it goes back to body consciousness. If what you're looking at someone, if the context of your dealing with that person or experience that person is really focused on body consciousness, on how you are perceived. Let me not use the term body consciousness because that's maybe a term that's very specific to what we study. But if you're everything you do is focused, has an aspect of how you're perceived in it. How am I going to be looked at? How do I? Then it's very hard for you to be able to engage with anybody else and actually find out what they're about, because you're still obsessed with what you're about. And we're not even going to get into the why people are so self-conscious. That's another constant conversation that's probably could be a subject of an entire session. But the perception, how you're perceived, and how you're constantly looking to see how you're perceived, how they perceive you well, that makes it impossible for you to engage with anybody else.
Right.
It makes it impossible. It kills everything. It kills love. It kills everything, because unless you're able to get out of yourself, you can't even get to the point of loving someone else.
Right. I just wanted to ask if anyone has any other comments, but I just had a thought and it just flew out of my head, so maybe it wasn't that important. But at minimum, when you relate to someone else, if you can bring sweetness to that 1 second or more relationship, that is at minimum a means of joy. When people say, well, what does that mean? How do I give joy to another person? Just be kind to them. Seriously, be sweet. Don't give them sorrow. At minimum, that already you are building towards a life of joy. And I have learned that, from a practical experience. I wasn't always joyful, I tell you, but it came from within that I wasn't joyful. I wasn't happy. I have mentioned before to the audience, I wasn't very easy at giving compliments. Now compliments come easy. And guess what? They're real. They're sincere. I really like you. So the fact that I don't want to give sorrow to anyone, that I want to be sweet and kind to that person, has already changed for me how to become more joyful. And as a result, more people I find come to me looking for that joy. And it's a pleasure that I can deal with them, because they come to me going, oh, well, you're not going to go to Michelle because you want darkness. You're going to go to Michelle because, she's going to be probably pretty nice to you. And that's a blessing. That's a gift that I have. It's always been there, but I've developed it. I've made that choice. And I noticed that, especially lately, that people will call me and contact me looking for, that goodness. So if people ask, how do I get that? Just start being just nice, not nice, kind, and want to be sweet, like we say, sugar water, not salt water. And that's what I always use. I'm going to add sugar to the conversation, not salt. So I don't know if you have anything else, because the hour is getting a little late, Tony.
I've talked for a long time. I'm hoping some other people would be interested in talking.
Okay. It's been more quiet the last few weeks. I think people are more reflective now. But we can start if you have, because I have a few announcements. So if you can do a kind and sweet meditation for us, that could make us find that space. That would be wonderful. Tony, are you okay with doing a meditation with us?
I'm fine.
That's great. Thank you so much.
we need to try to see light, not with our eyes, but to experience it. To experience its brightness, its colors and its hues. We need to go into ourselves. Begin to shed all of these notions about what we think we are, and even more importantly, what we think we should be, and focus on what we experience. How do we experience ourselves? How do we understand the nature of the world that we inhabit, not by what we see or we can touch, but what we experience, what comes into our consciousness when it is not concerned with how we feel or what we're doing. We need to go deep and settle in to the center where our life comes from, where our own brightness and our own colors and our own qualities project out, and try to make them free of any of the encumbrances of our own self-perception. This is the way we can begin to feel free and experience the world in that context. Shanti.
Shanti, Tony, that was lovely meditation commentary. I really enjoyed it. Jane, did you want to say something?
I wanted to say that was beautiful. Share what you gave us in terms of the experience. Thank you, Tony. You really feel the experience. And Michelle, that was a beautiful moment. The whole experience of all the information that I received in that short period of time. So thank you very much.
I agree, Jane. I felt, it's even the commentary was very important. I had a visual. I don't always get strong visuals when I meditate, but I kind of felt like I was climbing up rocks, very hard rocks, because we are spirits in a material world. And those rocks were very sharp and jaggedy, but still I was climbing. So that was my visual, which was unusual that I got it. So I thank you, Tony. That helped me get to that point. And I'm still climbing, but there are a lot of hard rocks out there. So thank you for that. That was just a lovely, very intense, wonderful experience, Tony. I told you wouldn't be so disappointed, everybody. And thank you, Brother Eric, and thank you, Baba God, for bringing us all together, and thank you, Harmony House. So next week, woohoo, it's April, and it's going to be spring, and it's a time for renewal. And you can feel it already when you walk down and you see those cute little buds coming through. And we have a treat. We have Judy Rogers, who she's going to be joining us. And I think I'm looking at Louise. I think Louise is going to be the host, so that's going to be great too. And our subject is renew your thoughts. So your thoughts are there, but we're going to renew only the good stuff. So the topic is renew your thoughts. And with that, we will see you next week. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Brother Eric. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Baba. And I'm signing.
Thank you, Tony. And just a reminder, if you're interested, if you haven't taken a class in Raja Yoga meditation, you're quite welcome to come to Harmony House in Great Neck at 6:30 on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and we'll introduce you to some of the concepts that
Works.
made everybody happy on this call. So thanks for coming. See you next week. Have a-
It works. Thank you. Bye.
May physics always find you happy. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you. Beautiful, Tony. Thank you.
Thank you.